Justice takes many forms and many hands. I'm Shane Murphy Goldsmith, President and CEO of Liberty Hill Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you to Season 5 of Conversations from the Front Lines, where we tackle some of the most challenging social justice issues of the day with heart and honesty. This season, we're connecting past to present and future. It's easy to get disheartened about how much further we have left to go in our fight for the society we want to see. But the truth is that so much of our world was inconceivable 50 years ago. We have a lot we're still working on, but it helps me to see our current challenges in the context of the incredible work that's been done before us. Here at Liberty Hill, we focus on change, not charity. So this season, we're going to hear from the organizers, community leaders, and thought partners who are transforming systems and reimagining what's possible for Los Angeles. Along the way, we'll also understand how our 50-year legacy equips us to make our vision for the future real. This season explores the power of grassroots organizing and why it matters now more than ever. In today's episode, we're going to take a closer look at the means by which Liberty Hill and our peers partner with and support that organizing. In a word, philanthropy. So let's start with the basics. What is philanthropy? How does it span activities as diverse as simple charity and long-term movement building? What happens when philanthropy stops treating communities as recipients of charity and starts treating them as the architects of change? And how do the beliefs and experiences of donors, philanthropic leaders, and the people who staff and run foundations help or hinder that vital work? 50 years ago, when Liberty Hill was founded, the idea of funding the people directly impacted by social injustices was unthinkable. Liberty Hill has spent the last 5 decades proving that people on the front lines with firsthand experience who understand their challenges the most are actually the most qualified to tell us how to make meaningful change. But broadly speaking, the world of philanthropy doesn't always operate with the same approach. So today, I've welcomed Glen Galaich onto the show to help us understand where philanthropy falls short and how we can expand our impact. Glen is the CEO of the Stupski Foundation. He spent more than 2 decades partnering with philanthropists, policymakers, and community leaders to shift mindsets in philanthropy and advance social change. He's been recognized as one of Time 100's most influential figures in philanthropy. He's the best-selling author of Control: Why Big Giving Falls Short. And he co-hosts the hit podcast, Break Fake Rules. Welcome, Glen. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise, this is fun to be here.
So, Glen, you wrote this book that I'm sure is taking the world by storm called Control. And so we're going to talk about the ideas in that book and the ideas that you're running around the country teaching people. So I wanted to start just getting to know you a little bit. Would love to hear a little bit about you, how you ended up where you are today. And in particular, in your book, you talk about this kind of conversion story. So I would love to hear your personal conversion story.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It is such an honor to be a part of anything the Liberty Hill Foundation is doing. As a result of, we've done some collaborative stuff in the past, and it gave me an opportunity coming on today to just look over that amazing history of the foundation and what you've done and what, in many ways, if there were grades for Control, I think you'd have easily an A+.
I think A+, really.
I appreciate you having me on, but I don't think anyone's learning anything today in this room. But there could be people who are listening, and I hope so. That is a very big question you just asked. So I'm going to try to just take it down to a quick summary, which is I've been in what I would call institutional philanthropy for about 25 years. For most of that time, I was in what we used to call donor education. We now call it we used to also call it philanthropic supporting organizations.
Oh, yes, PSOs.
And now we are calling them philanthropic infrastructure organizations. So we are now in the PIO version.
Okay.
So for most of my existence in this sector, that's what I've been doing. But in the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to head up the Stupski Foundation. We are based in the San Francisco area, and we work in both San Francisco, Oakland, and Hawaii, which has a lot to do with the donor, which is very much the theme of Control. The short of it is, having worked with literally thousands of donors over that time, I came to really, in the early days, really believed wholeheartedly in the idea that when someone creates a foundation or puts their money into a donor-advised fund or whatever they might do, that they really should be passionate about it, focused on it, and we should base what they want to do on what they want to do. Like, what is it that interests them? And I did that for most of this time. And as I then got into the world of an actual foundation, so I went about 15 years of doing this work and never made a grant. So the first time I made a grant was when I got to the Stupski Foundation and immediately instituted all the various what we called historically or the last couple decades strategic philanthropy, all the various strategic philanthropy stuff, what I now refer to as donor-centered strategic philanthropy. So we did all that. I'll cut to the chase and say that we got to a place where it became pretty clear that we needed to go a different direction. The world was speaking loudly that this donor-centered stuff is not really getting the impact or will not get the impact you're really looking for. And so that, in a nutshell, is the conversion. There were many, many steps to that. But it led, kind of the combination of working with donors for a very long time, running a foundation, a spend-out foundation. I kind of had my own moment about 7 years ago where I realized we need to change things dramatically if we're really going to benefit, or if the world's really going to benefit from any of these resources that we're stewarding.
So your conversion was from somebody who believed that a donor's philanthropy should exist to pursue their vision and what they want. And the conversion was actually, in order for the donor to have the impact they want, they have to give up that control.
That's it in a nutshell. That is it. But the fancier way, I think, of saying it, at least that's how what I tell myself, is it's really moving from a place of private stewardship with public assets into a place of public stewardship with public assets. And that's a loaded statement. So
yes,
I think there are thousands of people who are working in institutional philanthropy. So that means, tax shelters essentially that have been institutionalized into something we call foundations. The people that initially give money that becomes a foundation, if they tell you they're doing it for charitable reasons, they're lying. Most people do it strictly for tax reasons. And when they're being really honest, I just spoke to a very wealthy donor just on Friday. And she stopped me as we were leaving and she said, that part in the book where you say, if you'd say you're doing it for charitable reasons, you're lying. She's like, I have to tell you, that was a moment of honesty for me.
Wow.
That's true. When we originally set up our foundation, we were guided by an estate planner and an accountant, and we did it really to reduce our tax obligation. That's why we did it. We then realized we had it, and we then started wanting to be better about it and being more, effective in how in the fact that we're going to have to give this money away. And so that's a very honest assessment, and that is why most people have a foundation if they have one. The key point is it's not their foundation. Once you create a foundation, you are essentially putting your money, maybe 1, maybe 10 donations into it just from one donor. It's private only in the sense that one donor made a donation to it. It's still as public a foundation as any foundation. It is something that we as the American people are investing in by giving this enormous tax subsidy. It can be as high as 70% of a tax benefit to a wealthy individual. So they're getting this huge benefit putting it into the foundation. But that's not enough. They want to take the tax benefit. They then write the bylaws. The bylaws put them in position as chair of the board. The kids get thrown on as board members. Their good friend Bob comes on. He's the lawyer who's worked with them for 40 years. He's going to come on the board. And that group is going to make up a critical set of decision makers who we are counting on as public stewards, because it's not their money and it's majority American money. It's money that was heading toward the U.S. Treasury and it made a quick left turn into their Treasury.
Or right turn, depending on
wherever it may be, correct.
But wait a minute. So you just said something really important. You said it's not their money.
Right.
Now, Liberty Hill Foundation, we have donor advised funds, we have giving circles, we also
Sure.
receive individual donations from people. And
Right.
I think pretty much everybody who signs their name on a check would say, well, it's my money. In fact, I've said that about our donors. Well, it is their money. One of the things that's interesting about your book is that, lots of people are critical of philanthropy, right? Lots of people are critical of the way donors control their funds, but you come at it from a place of having deeply invested and deeply believed in that. And
Yeah.
I feel like the way you write the book is you clearly care deeply about the donor that you work for, and you care deeply about the idea that folks want to generously, give their wealth away and have it make an impact. Talk a little bit about how did you sort of go from the place of, okay, it's your money, let me help you spend it according to your vision, to actually, it's not your money, and if you want it to be used effectively, you have to release control.
The co-founders of the Stupski Foundation were Larry and Joyce Stupski. So Larry had already passed away in 2013 when I came on board in 2015. So my primary relationship for the first 6 years of my time at Stupski was with Joyce. And that's who you're referring to when you say we had a close and deep relationship, and we did. That said, we did what most foundations do, especially when the donors are alive and on the board. We did what made sense to Joyce. So if you go to our website, you'll see we have 4 issue areas. Those 4 issue areas were the things that Joyce cared about. She didn't go out to the broader community of San Francisco and say, what's most pressing to communities in San Francisco? We want to be responsive. She said, what's important to Joyce? I want to do that. She then, said, I care about one issue area more than another. And so we decided, the percentages of output based on Joyce's percentages. We are a spend out foundation because Joyce had decided that she wanted to be around to see all the money distributed, and so on and so on. So that as opposed to what I was already hinting at earlier, which would be, another way to do it would be to say, hey, we see a world out there that has needs. Why don't we find out from, in some way, no process is perfect, so I'm not going to lay out for you a perfect process, but can you bring together, or should we have brought together some important community leaders and said, hey, what's really important in San Francisco right now? We have this much capital to work with. We're unusually positioned vis-a-vis other foundations in that we're going to move all of it. We're going to move all of it as soon as we can. We're not going to just move 5% annually. So what should we do? And kind of do that. And then once you do that process, you start to also build relationships, and you hear about solutions that are coming from people who are living in these situations, not necessarily Joyce, who had a pretty privileged life. She was living in places that were far away from the community she cared about. She did very much care about, Bayview in San Francisco and Oakland in Alameda, and she cared about Native Hawaiians and what they were dealing with in Hawaii. But at the same time, she was telling them to some degree, not to come off too harshly here, but she was telling them what she thinks they should be concerned about, according to Joyce. So that is the control factor. The question is, just simply put, are you going to the public and saying, we're stewarding public assets here? What to you would be the most effective thing that we could do right now with those assets? And we will move them to you as effectively as we can, and we'll take off from there. And that's just not how philanthropy is done. And why do I think that works? Because we have seen time and again that when people who are living in certain conditions or living in a certain place, no matter how marginalized or unmarginalized they are, they have ideas, they have experiences from where they exist that they can then put in place if they've got the resources to do it. That's the one thing that's missing most of the time, the resources to do it. So the more I start thinking about these things, the more I see how we're operating, I start to realize we could come up really short here if we continue going about business the way we are.
And so you've kind of diagnosed this problem as the mindset of control. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting too, because so many books and articles about philanthropy are more about the practices and often
Yes.
offer a set of practices that you can adopt to accomplish something in a different way. But you kind of reluctantly put some practices in your book, but really you're talking about a mindset of control. So help us better understand, what is this mindset? What does it look like? You just gave one really good example, which is that sort of initial decision about what you want to fund. But beyond that, what is this mindset of control? How do you see it manifest in philanthropy?
It's the operating system on which institutional philanthropy is built, and for the most part, all philanthropy to some degree, right? I mean, in the United States this year, we just got the latest report. We're going to do over $600 billion in philanthropy this year.
Say that again.
600 billion, right? Now, of that 600 billion, 100 billion will come from foundations. Some additional 100 billion, I think it's not clear in the data, so don't hold me to this, but I think there's about another 100 billion that's coming in from individual donors outside of their foundations. By that I mean wealthy, high giving, big giving individual donors. The remaining 400 billion is coming from small donors, and over half of that, 3/4 of that is going to religion, usually to religious institutions. And the remaining 100 billion is going to what you would call social change causes of all different types, or social causes of all different types. So we're talking about, 1/3, let's call it 1/3 of the slice of the full US philanthropic pie. Of that, most of it will be given by an individual who has their own thoughts and agenda, and they're making some kind of a gift. That is just important context. When it comes to the big givers, though, the ones that I'm focusing on, people who are giving at least $1 million annually, that operating system goes back to, the early or the late 1800s, when Carnegie was writing about the gospel of wealth. And he was basically laying out the argument that we make every day about why individuals get these enormous tax breaks to give. Because if we go back to our pie chart, that imaginary pie chart I just drew, that pie chart, 2/3 of the people giving in the pie chart get very little, if any, tax benefit from their giving. They give because they want to give, and they want to do it for philanthropic reasons. They don't care about the tax back. The other third, the very wealthy, you're not getting a penny unless they see something back the other way. And that goes back to the Carnegie story, which is that in his case, he said, there are people in our world who just simply operate effectively in the economic system we have. These people are smarter, sharper about how to do this type of work. They're going to amass enormous wealth. And so they are obligated, in his mind, to give back to the dumb people, the ones that can't operate well in this system. And so, there is this patrimonial, patriarchal viewpoint that he holds, that he's going to give to the poor who haven't done it like he's done it. But at least he came to that conclusion. At least we have a lot of very, very wealthy players today who are arguing the opposite. You have guys like Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel who are arguing we amass this wealth because we're doing such amazing things for the world. That's basically our philanthropy. Like, we build these big technology systems, you all benefit for it. So, hey, you're welcome, and don't expect anything back because, you people don't deserve it. We've given you all we're going to give you. So at least Carnegie came to that place, and that viewpoint of very wealthy individuals that we then want to cherish and honor through the way they give. We're going to give them tax breaks. We're going to center things on them. We're going to hope that they do things to the benefit of all of us. That breeds, in my opinion, a mindset of control. It says we are granting control to you to do it the way you want. And once someone says that, or once you get that opportunity, I mean, who knows how it's going to go. And then you have to think about who it is that's getting that opportunity. These are people that have fancy investment teams. They have lots of people managing their lives, taking care of their every situation, and they want to do the same thing with their giving, and they bring those same players in to give. So it's very controlling that way. And, we are all supposed to kind of genuflect and say, hey, thank you so much for giving anything. But what we're missing in that is that they are getting an enormous tax benefit. So what I will say is just one quick little disclaimer. I have less of an issue of someone giving privately. If they're not getting a tax benefit, I don't think it's up to me necessarily. There are plenty of arguments out there. And I think Edgar Villanueva makes a great one. Like, how you made the money matters, and what you do with it after that. I think that's true. I don't go down that road. I think he's got it covered. So I'm not going to come back and restate his argument, only to say that I think if you're giving privately, I think it's less of an issue about what kind of say the public has over your giving than it is when we're giving a massive amount of tax money over and saying you give it for us. I think it's just a completely different
Well, that's
picture.
what makes it public money.
Exactly. And if you're going to act with a mindset of control, I'm arguing, try to push yourself to get over to the community side. This is not a book that's saying right or wrong necessarily, although I think I give my orientation pretty clearly. But I'm also not saying 0 to 60, because some of the things we talk about in the book might be really challenging for some families to get their head around. I'm asking for people to think about the control as a spectrum, and how can you move along that spectrum?
So the mindset of control, I mean, when you think about it, that's pretty deeply American, right? Like the idea that that we can and should control everything and put it within our control and then put it to use for our own gain. That seems quite deeply American. And I think about it's not just philanthropy where we see this, right? I spent a lot of time organizing people who are receiving welfare, and I spent as much time with the welfare caseworkers as with the people receiving welfare. And the caseworkers, in the welfare department would often, people who receive welfare will often say that they act like it's their money, and you're dragging it out, kicking and screaming, trying to get their money out of them. So we see that in the welfare system. We see that, in all kinds of systems where if I have something, no matter how I got it, welfare, where it's not literally the welfare workers' money. And in most cases in philanthropy, except if it's a family foundation where the donor is the one, making the decisions and talking to the grantees, it's almost never the person's money who's sitting there wielding that power. And yet it seems to come with the territory that people think if I get to decide where the money goes, then I must have some inherently, I must know better.
I am always happy to do a critical assessment of America, but I think what we're talking about is humans, really, generally speaking. And I think when you look at not to get into a bigger, broader conversation here, but when I put on my political scientist hat, which I rarely do anymore, but if you look at the broad history of humanity, this idea that you're going to have a public that has some kind of say in the distribution of resources is just a tiny sliver of the broader story of humanity. What you typically see is wealth concentrated in the hands of very few people. What typically comes with wealth is power, not always, but mostly. And they wield it, and they want to control it, and they don't want anyone to mess with it. And then they tell stories to themselves. They write mythologies about why they get to do that. In America, it's been white supremacy. In other places, there's other arguments, whatever it is. There's some case that somebody with power and wealth makes that says, I'm a superior player and I'm going to control it. And in many ways, what we're talking about, we write this narrative about those with the most power and write something as if there's something special there. This idea that there's going to be distributed resources based on some kind of democracy is just a tiny, humans have just been dominating in different forms in all ways. So I do think this is a challenging question for us. It's a challenging request to say, hey, we are saying to you, not only if you make this donation to this foundation that so happens to be in your name, we're going to also put in, 50 to 70% of that money, and we're going to trust you because there's something unique about you. In a way, it is counter-American, in at least in what we say we want to be,
or what we've always been trying not to be,
Aspiring.
aspiring to be different.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the mindset of control, it strikes me that you mentioned earlier that often these are high net worth people, so they've benefited from the economic system. They've whether it's through inheritance or they've figured out how to work the system so that they can be successful and earn lots of money. And I wonder how that then, in addition to the sort of the mindset of control in terms of what they fund and how they fund it, it's probably comes with a kind of unquestioned allegiance to the systems as they are, and the idea that I do, like you said with Carnegie, it's like, well, more people should, there should be fewer barriers to succeeding the way I have, and so I wonder if it leads to a type of giving as decentralized and uncoordinated as it is, that sort of aggregates up to really maintaining the status quo, because the people making the decisions, why would they question the status quo beyond tweaking at the edges where the people fall through the cracks and so on? But why would they question the system fundamentally? And I wonder how that narrows dulls the impact philanthropy can have.
It's a great question. So I'm going to go back to your point earlier. You were saying, well, the donor's money is the donor's money, even at the Liberty Hill Foundation. And I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that a donor, when you said they cut the check, at that point, it is their money. But once they hand it over to the Liberty Hill Foundation, it's Liberty Hill's stewardship at that point. Those donors are unique because they've said, I want to do something to address the systemic failures of our society. So I'm going to move this capital that could be sitting in a hedge fund inside my foundation instead over to Liberty Hill and let them do something to address systemic problems. But you are right, I think. I haven't done the study on this. It's just an observation that most of the philanthropy you see, left and right, but even more right, is really an investment in the status quo. I mean, the right is very out front about it. Like, everything we've ever loved about America needs to stay in place, and we are going to give everything we can for that. The left has more of an interest in progress and progressive issues, but even then, there's a limit to what I think progressive donors are willing to do. Will they question the economic system? Will they question the impacts of the economic system? Will they encourage change in how the political system works? Will they encourage change in how our social and cultural institutions operate? Not really. Like, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I just wonder, like, if we really played free market with arts and culture, for example, what would happen to opera and symphony? I'm guessing probably don't have it. But donors, wealthy donors, make sure that we do. Now, good, bad, I don't know. But if we really, for a country that believes so strongly in the free market, there are certain things that very wealthy people who have benefited from that free market will put their hand on the scale for. I don't know why. I don't know what the benefit is of having the symphony for wealthy people, but they're keeping it around. Again, not a judgment and not a statement on that, but just a reality, which leads me to my next piece, which I think is really, you're getting into a zone that is, to me, again, keeping judgment out, just a reflection, just seeing something out there. We have a major concern in the United States about political financing. We have a commission, the Federal Election Commission, that is there to make sure, for better or for worse, mostly worse, that they're monitoring how these dollars are being distributed, who's distributing them, and what's being done with those dollars when they are distributed. That system will be the amount of money that will come through the election system on the federal level starting January 1st, 2028 to 9, and then from 7 and to 8. So we're going to do that 2-year run. That's our next federal cycle. We're just coming to the end of one right now. We're going to go into another one. That one coming up that's going to have the presidency, a third of the Senate, and the House is going to run about $15 billion over 2 years to get that done. I know it sounds like a lot. Each year, if you just split that up in two halves, right? You got 7.5 million in 27, you got 7.5 billion, in 28. That's what's going to be spent. In that same time, Shane, institutional foundations are going to do 100 billion in 2027 and do 100 billion in 2028.
Wow.
They're going to move money directly to public policy, which I don't think we think about enough as the work we do. When we think of public policy, and I've been having these great conversations with the dean of the Goldman School of Public Policy at Berkeley, and he was the one who came to me and he said, have you ever thought about the fact that when you work at a foundation, you are doing direct public policy? I'm like, no, I mean, we fund public policy. He's like, no. You're not funding government. I'm not talking about funding government. I'm talking about directly making public policy from where you sit at the foundation. If you are funding a hospital, you are directly engaging in public health policy. If you are funding an arts program, you are directly engaging in public policy. You are making a choice on behalf of the American people about what arts and culture we get. You're making a choice about what services are going to be available at a hospital, whether one is even going to exist potentially in that geographic location. You're making the same decisions about education. You're making them about reproductive rights. The list goes on. So when you think about, we are crazy focused on the elections and public policy that will come out of government at $7 billion a year. Just take that up tenfold, and you've got the amount of money coming in annually from philanthropy. Guess what doesn't exist? You know this. There is no such thing called the Federal Philanthropy Commission. There is no, the IRS is the only watchdog, and they are highly politicized and doing whatever the different whims of the political environment wants. You know, if right wingers in power, they're going to make sure all the left wing radicals are taken care of. If left wing is in power, they're going to make sure the right wing is dealt with. So it's, and even then they don't really, you know, I don't even know if anyone reads the audit we do for the state of California. So it is a very unaccountable, highly influential sector. And it does make me wonder, like, what levels of control are we paying attention to out there?
So we've got a highly influential, unaccountable, undemocratic system, for lack of a better word, giving away hundreds of billions of dollars, far more than folks are contributing to elections. Now, that sounds similar to the crisis that we're in this country, right? We have a very powerful and influential set of folks who are unaccountable and who are making decisions for our nation and for the world, and really dismantling democracy. And a lot of the conversations, you know, I've been having with other foundation CEOs is about the idea that philanthropy was not designed to address the challenges that we're seeing now. And I think we're seeing so many new foundation CEOs come into that role, and they're sort of, you know, even if they've been in philanthropy most of their careers, it's still being the CEO is a completely different thing. And here we are with just, you know, democracy crumbling, and they're sitting on, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars or more, and starting to really question, why is it that I'm sitting on so much money and yet I can't seem to move it in a way that feels like it's really going to get to the heart of the crisis in our democracy and in our economy right now. And I wonder if it's not only, I mean, it's got to be more than a coincidence. And I wonder if it's actually causally related, that if that much more money is coming out of philanthropy to influence our nation, and it's the money is being earned and disseminated in an entirely undemocratic way, I mean, how could it possibly untangle that so that it could give the resources out in a way that strengthens democracy and equity?
That's the big question. I don't, you know, I think there are a lot of factors involved in the mindset of control. I think there are a lot of factors that who ultimately has control, what do they prioritize in their life and in their philanthropy? Who is influencing them most profoundly? And I think if you take all three of those, and maybe more, we could probably come up with a list of a set of groupings and categories for all of that. You will find some high percentage of the variables that will explain why money's not moving. I've had conversations with some of our large foundation CEOs, and oftentimes they will, most blame their board. Like,
Yes.
I've done the best I can. best I can, I can. And, we had a camp, we were able to move 1% more, and we've encouraged others to do the same. But that's pretty good. That's about as good as I can do with my board or my bylaws. That's another one. The bylaws prevent them from doing more. And I do think, to your point earlier about the systems that exist and the status quo and who's ultimately making decisions about it, they're running these foundations like businesses.
Right.
And that to me is where, I talk about this in the book to some extent, that a lot of the reason why we need to have foundations and why we need to have philanthropy is because there is this, really important concept that drives American capitalism, and it's called return on investment. And how you get a return on investment is you've got to make sure that the cost of making something, or the cost of delivering something, or the cost of extracting something is as low as possible so that you can get as much return on what you're putting in. And oddly enough, that same mindset, which I think is highly destructive, it means that labor has to be kept cheap. It means that how we approach the earth has to be very cheap, from extraction and other forms. I mean, all forms of extraction, ideally for a capitalist economy to run most efficiently, needs to be really cheap. And we have to be able to then get the return we're looking for, whatever that is. In the case of philanthropy, we want the return to be over 5% annually, because we're going to give away the bare freaking minimum of what the government requires. The world can be burning, but we're going to make sure we only give 5%, because that's what the government requires. And you have to wonder, like, if we didn't have that 5% that came in 69, would people be giving anything right now? I don't even know if the foundations would even be moving money at all. So there's this minimum that they're going to give, and they have to earn above that. And that is the business of institutional philanthropy, right? The business is we have to get a return high enough to keep going forever. Or this other concept came into our lives, and when I started in philanthropy, this idea of the social return on investment. So here the idea is that you're going to move money to something, and you're going to see some kind of social return, which is, to me, immeasurable and impossible to define. And that's why people finally gave up on it. But what's surrounding all of this is the idea, just put simply, that these are businesses we're running here. And they're not. All these things are, which I try to remind myself all the time when I'm at work, when I'm staring in the mirror. Joyce and Larry Stupski wanted to get a tax benefit. So they used an instrument that allowed them to get the tax benefit. And we've institutionalized it into this thing that's supposedly like a business that gives out money perpetually forever. It doesn't, like, all that was supposed to happen was that the money was supposed to go to people that needed it. That's it. That's the simplest thing that was supposed to happen here, whether it is to people that need it or to intermediaries, perhaps, that really are close to the ground, that can do that for them. In my opinion, it was never meant to sit in these monoliths that are going to live forever. These businesses that are driving forward with the same branding strategies, the same messaging and advertising and everything that goes on in something that is designed to extract and return an investment. It's just weird. It's very irrational to me. It's pretty irrational, but we live it as if it's completely rational. In fact, some foundations literally have in their bylaws that they have to maintain purchasing power annually.
Oh, wow.
What does that even mean in a social context? Like, who are you purchasing? What are you talking about? But they are in bylaws. They say it is like the law of this organization and the state in which we were formed that we will maintain annual purchasing power, which has been defined as maintaining the capital forever.
And that we call perpetuity, which
What
is
I call perpetuity
one of your
over
favorite
humanity.
subjects. Yes. So let's talk about perpetuity over humanity. This is another one that I think, in endowments in general and perpetuity in particular, I think is becoming, folks in philanthropy are beginning to question this in a way I haven't seen before. And I think it is, it's partially, my sense is it's partially the the democratic crisis we find ourselves in, and it's partially that we've got so many new folks coming into these roles who are just like had never paid attention to the 95%. They had always been focused on the 5%, and so I am seeing folks start to question it. And what strikes me, so first of all, Liberty Hill Foundation, we do have an endowment. It's about $6 million, whereas our annual budget is about $32 million. So the the endowment gives us about $300,000 a year, which means
that's how you do it, folks.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Yes.
If anyone is listening at a major foundation, that's how you do it.
Yes. Well,
that's it.
Having to earn our money
now, Shane.
does keep us humble and accountable to some degree. So I don't have these issues myself, but I hear a lot about them from other foundation CEOs. And when they talk about perpetuity, I always think, but what about the perpetuity of the communities we're supporting? What about turning resources over to the control of communities and community members so that they can go on in perpetuity, so that the things that are going to benefit them can go on in perpetuity versus literally the investment, the corpus of the endowment going on in perpetuity. So in some ways, I wonder whether we can use that concept that's so, for those who are listening who are not, inside institutional philanthropy may not be as aware of this, but the idea that you're talking about, Glenn, that, the corpus has to be maintained and grow forever and ever is, really does seem to dictate most, if not all, of the decisions that foundations make. So part of me wonders whether we can use this notion of perpetuity that folks are so wedded to help them see that the perpetuity of the corpus, or, the perpetuity of communities is at least as important as perpetuity of a corpus.
I would hope so.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe not in America, but
that's you're being rational, Shane.
I'm sorry.
Be careful. We're talking about institutional philanthropy.
Yeah, sorry. Went off the deep end there, but you're really saying actually that let's actually question the notion of perpetuity, and what you're pointing out is it's perpetuity kind of versus humanity, as if in some ways the two are mutually exclusive. So can you talk a little bit more about, you've talked a bit about sort of the critique of perpetuity, and I wonder what it looks like to choose humanity over perpetuity.
You said it very, very well. And I'll just use the line that we use at Stupski, which is, why is it more important for us to hold on to this money than the organizations doing the work on the front lines?
There you go.
I mean, that's a question I think every board meeting at every foundation should start with that question. And that everyone should go around the room and explain why it's more important to warehouse it in a hedge fund than to move it to organizations that need it desperately all the time, not just in a crisis. We don't need to have a crisis to move the money. Then the next question becomes, why wouldn't you do? I mean, why, if you've got a mission at your foundation, I'm sure you want to do something for somebody somewhere. Why would you do it at 5% ever? And if you were running your business and you said, look, we're here to get as large a return as possible on our investment, but most of the time we're only going to do that at 5%. You wouldn't have investors, you wouldn't have staff, you wouldn't have salespeople. I don't know. You wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't have people working in the warehouse. Nobody would want to be a part of this dead organization. And so I don't understand why we force that upon the nonprofit sector we call partners and we call heroes. We give them it's all, when you really stop and think about it. And that's all, in many ways, Shane, the point of this book was just to ask people to stop and reflect. Because I believe really strongly in trust-based philanthropy. I believe that Dimple Abinchundani is right, that there's a new era of philanthropy before us. I believe that Voulay is telling folks really important things about how to do fundraising and otherwise in a more equitable way. I think all of that is possible if one thing is tackled first, and that is this control factor, getting past some of these irrationalities that prevent donors from doing the things that they really say they want to do. And I believe they do. So just one in particular is, how can you look at 100% of a resource, a charitable resource, and say, all we're ever going to give away is 5% of that annually? And the rest of it, we're going to put in private equity, stocks, debt, real estate speculation, and hedge funds. And some will keep in cash. I mean, most foundations are so committed to that stuff that when a crisis hits, they literally cannot get out of it fast enough to address the crisis. Private equity never takes its claws out of you. If you put your money in a private equity account, that's their money pretty much. They're going to give it back to you when they want to. They're going to give you the dividends when they get them, and they're going to keep the principal for as long as they want to. So if you come back to them and say, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but the entire state of California is going into the sea. We're going to try to help mitigate that. Can we get some money to help with that? We need to get our money back for that. They're going to say, well, actually, that's our money now, pretty much. I mean, we'll give it back to you. It's true. It is yours still. But that's the type of stuff we've gotten ourselves into because we're putting perpetuity over humanity. I don't understand it. The only thing I can tell you, having been there, having been in that mindset, is that I never chose to understand it. I just said, it is what it is. It just is what it is. The money is there to deal with things in the future. And my question back to anyone who's bought into this perpetuity thing, which, by the way, is 99.9% of the people that work at foundations, my question back is like, okay, so what are you going to do in the future that you're doing differently today? Meaning you're doing very little to help most situations today based on your corpus. You're doing as little as you can. So should we expect that in the future you'll continue to do as little as you can? Because that, to me, is a problem.
So we're talking a lot about some of these inherent contradictions. That's how I would describe it within philanthropy. And one of them, as we've talked about, is that the folks making these decisions is that these are the high net worth donor class, and generally the resources are meant to help low income people on the margins of society. So that there's very different class interests there, and that causes many contradictions. One of which, though, is what you're talking about in terms of investing the endowment. Because, I mean, you particularly call out real estate speculation, which is an interesting one because I don't know if Los Angeles would exist without real estate speculation. I mean, it is entirely what fuels the local economy. And at the same time, of course, there's, so much of the work Liberty Hill funds is actually about trying to stem the tide of the result of speculation, which is ever increasing costs of land and property, and folks can't afford to live here. So I'm curious, how do you kind of think about that class struggle that is basically in play? So when foundations are deciding to invest their endowments, it's I think one way to rationalize it is, well, okay, we're taking dirty money and using it for good. Maybe it came out of real estate speculation, or the corpus is growing due to real estate speculation, but we are, out there spending it for good. But if one of the primary drivers of inequality, for example, in Los Angeles is real estate speculation, and that's, foundations, whether they question it or not, whether they think about it or not, are deeply invested in and benefiting from that system. I mean, how do you I don't even, now I've gotten myself all tangled up. I mean, where do you even start to have the conversation about, what are good and, what are investments that align with your mission and what are investments that don't align with your mission? And if folks, fundamentally are benefiting from that system, what would cause them to question it? And who's to say that real estate speculation is bad?
I think the data shows that real estate speculation is pretty bad. I think it does. And when you're looking at it from a social perspective, right? Like if you're trying, you just hit a couple of the key points, right? Cost of housing is extremely high, in part because, not certainly exclusively because, but in part because people can buy up lots and lots and lots of real estate and take it off the market, and it forces up the price of everything that's on the market. But what also happens, there's a really great piece that was done on More Perfect Union on YouTube. They have a story in there about a team of people that investigate private equity firms. And they do it specifically to look at where pension funds are invested and what the impact of them being invested in private equity looks like. And so they tell this story. I don't want to be wrong about this, so I'm just going to say I'm not sure whether the pension fund and the people who end up suffering as a result of this private equity team the private equity firm are connected. I don't know if these were pensioners who are inside the product, but basically this pension fund was investing in private equity that had bought up mobile home parks in very, very poor neighborhoods. And the private equity team, which is what private equity firms do, they come in, they suck out all the equity, and they leave behind a bankrupted product. And that is what happened here. So you end up seeing people getting kicked out of their mobile homes because the price of their mobile home is skyrocketed to deal with the creditors and the debt done by the private equity that was paid for by the pensions. So that story is told all over the country. I was just listening to something today about youth sports, and apparently private equity is going to get into youth sports. And you
Oh.
can be sure that when they get into youth sports, we're going to see a lot of youth sports camps and otherwise going out of business and kids not having anything to do over the summer. That is how the private equity model operates. And that's just one way that foundations invest. So I'm not saying they're all that way. Again, I generalize. I know I do that, but there's a pretty good amount of research that shows that when you're messing around in things again that are focused on high ROI to get your 5% or more, you are risking. This is where I think the biggest risk in the foundation sector exists. We talk a lot about risk on the grant side. I don't think there's any such thing. But on the investment side, we don't talk about the true risk, which is the harm we do with our investments. And there is no spectrum or tote board out there that says how much harm you're doing to give away money at a low rate every year for good. Like, what's the benefit harm measure out there? And I firmly believe, having seen it firsthand at Stupski, and I talk about this in Control, that we were invested in things that were doing harm, and we weren't accounting for that. I mean, we're not an impact measuring foundation. I don't really think you can do that. I know a lot of people have spent a lot of money, time. There are a lot of jobs out there right now measuring the impact of the foundation. I don't think that's even possible. But when you do it, I don't think any impact evaluator ever takes into consideration the risk and of harm that's going on within their investments. So the question you asked was, well, what should you do about that? In my opinion, foundations just should not be in the for-profit business, period, in my opinion. And I think they should just be out. Just use the money. There are so many ways to keep your principal for very long periods of time. And you can do that on mission. You can do PRIs, for example, or program-related investments that are fully tied into your mission in a way that you'll get your principal back. If you want to be a little extractive, you can take 2-3% back on that if you want to. A lot of community lending entities will do that with you. Most of them do. We did a whole bunch of PRIs for no interest. We just needed the principal back to pay salaries later, and the impact was incredible on some of these PRIs. If we had kept them in private equity, we sold off all of our private equity on the secondary market and we moved it into PRIs.
Wow.
And I can tell you, we are getting much more impact by having that money out and operating on the front lines. So I sometimes I'm breathless when I think, gosh, if you have a $17 billion foundation like Ford, if you could put $2 billion of it out in no interest, community-based loans, you could change community's trajectory forever. And I don't think it's that hard. It's a narrative. It's a narrative in our head that this is how it's done. And you just have to reflect. You got to ask the question, like, is it more important for us to have this money than the organizations working on the ground? Just over and over again, ask that question. I think eventually you're going to crack. It's going to break open on you. Your argument is, well, we're really good at investing private equity. Okay, well, let's talk about how great that is. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, the more you start questioning why you should have it, I think you're either going to end up realizing you're highly self-centered and motivated, or you are believing in a system of good that's not actually good. It could be very harmful. I believe that.
Yeah, and that starts to get to another point that I want to dig into, which is what you call the dream of solidarity. And I remember very distinctly, and the person who I'm talking about may be listening now and may remember this moment. It was a donor to Liberty Hill. I'd been in the role, long enough probably that I should have known better, but I was saying what I often say, which is I love Liberty Hill so much because our donors give against their self-interest. And having myself grown up poor and pissed off, that's what it looked like to me. And I was like, wow, you guys actually care about the rest of us, and you're actually willing to turn your resources over to campaigns that are intended to undo the very benefits that you've received. And this donor was like offended. And he said, well, that's not why I give. I give because I want the world to be better for me and my family and my children. And I see that we're all connected and that we all, my favorite quotes are about this very premise of, none of us can be free if any of us are oppressed. But I'm also sort of curious about this notion of solidarity, and because you may notice from my line of questioning that I'm very into this notion that there's sort of this donor class self-interest over here and the self-interest of low-income people over here, and I can easily fall into the trap of that sort of like us and them, zero-sum game mentality. Which I think is wrong, but I think it comes from, how I grew up. But how do you see that solidarity? And how do you see, how could we start to reframe this so that it's not, this sort of charity, wealthy people and, or wealthy institutions giving to people who have less, but that really we're all, making the world better for all of us. And why, how do we move in that direction? Why would donors who say, hey, it's my money, why would they, if you're like, you can't measure impact, you can't decide where the money goes and how it goes, and you're taking the fun out of philanthropy for these donors, Glenn. But perhaps it can be replaced by this notion of solidarity that we're all that none of us can be free when some of us aren't. So tell me how you see that.
Yeah, look, I think you said it very well. I think the goal. I'm sure this won't sound as eloquent as others who talk about equity and justice. But to me, I think the goal is to get to a place where we are reducing inequity to the point where people can really function to the best of their ability in a society. I think that's what solidarity is. It's reducing the amount of injustice and the amount of disparity so that we are all functioning to the best of our ability. That doesn't mean there doesn't have to be heavy-handed totalitarian action there. I do think that can be done through very smart public policy, which we just haven't seen in a while. By that, I mean the entire definition, which I sort of played around with earlier in this conversation about foundations engaging in public policy that is looking to achieve that same outcome. Now, like I said, there are people that are far more skilled at talking about equity of all forms, racial, gender, and otherwise than I am. But to me, that's our mission. I think that's the mission, I would hope, of any community, of any society. Otherwise, it's what humanity has been most of the time, which is a society that's built on enriching the most powerful. So that's to me the agenda. You said something really great there. I'm going to definitely go back and take the quote, which is, "You're taking the fun out of this for donors." I have to say that's a really important point from you, and that is my frustration. I think with donors is if they're, and again, I'm generalizing. There are plenty I've known. Like I said, I had a great conversation on Friday with one I deeply admire, and you've got yours that you deeply admire. So there are really people out there really are trying to do the best they can for the benefit of the public. That's all I'm asking for. Part of doing the best you can is a recognition that this is not a hobby. And that's the part that I think is really frustrating. When I talk about in my book, hours and hours and hours of trying to recruit people into a philanthropic training program. And I was competing with kitchen remodels and new babies being born and international trips they had to take. And every time I just sat there thinking, this is a hobby to you. You are stewarding money that's vital for people. It's a hobby for your investment teams. It's a hobby for your accountants. It's not seen with the kind of seriousness that public policy requires. And there's a story in the book about a grandmother who is very proud of the fact that every year she gives the grandchildren $5,000 to give away every year from the foundation. And she's trying to train them to be philanthropic. And, maybe people think a 5-year-old is better at giving away money than our legislators. But I'll say, I don't think when people talk about having a foundation, a public steward giving away money, I don't think they're thinking give it to 5-year-olds. And again, it's a great thing she's doing. She is a multi-billionaire. I'm pretty sure she's got some money in the background that she can hand over to the grandkids to give away. But when it comes to the foundation, it's not a hobby. And at the end of the day, that's really what I would like to see the standard raised, that you don't show up 4 times a year at a board meeting, review a docket of information you know nothing about and have tried to get yourself up to speed on in 3 to 4 days. Make decisions as to who's going to get that money or not after you had a whole team of people spend their day in and day out trying to make the best grants possible, reporting to you, and say, that's how I want to do philanthropy. I think if that's how you want to approach it, honestly, the most powerful thing you can do as a public steward is to step away and bring someone in who really wants to be a public steward. And we should honor that when it happens. And it does happen. You hear all the time, I hear grandmothers and grandfathers saying, I just can't get the 3rd generation interested in this stuff. You know what? Awesome. Don't get them interested. Tell them to go do other things. This is serious stuff. And we need to have people on boards that take it seriously about being a public steward. And I think it's fun, actually, when you care. All the things I've said, when they really make sense, when they click to you about, hey, we need to move this money. We're not going to spend our money trying to figure out if we're having impact or not. Let's just move it to the people that do need to know whether they're having impact or not. I think that's fun. I think people will have wonderful fun with that. But when it's a hobby, it may not sound that fun.
I agree with you. I love my job. I have fun every single day doing that.
Of course. And you're very serious about what you do.
Oh, yes.
It's not a hobby. Or maybe it is. Maybe it's both for you. But anyway, you have seriousness about it. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. So this is Liberty Hill's 50th anniversary this year. And
wow.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's quite an amazing thing. But it's really caused us to reflect a lot on not just the 50 years of our past, but the next 50 years, and really thinking about, what do we want to build and what do we want to leave behind. And I've dabbled a little bit in futurism and have become quite enamored. One of the notions of futurism, as I've learned it by Trista Harris, is she talks about how part of the challenge is that we love our problems, right? We fall in love with our problems and we spend all of our time and energy, counting the problems and analyzing the problems and worrying about the problems and saying that the problems are urgent, and not nearly enough energy thinking about, okay, what are the solutions? What not just solutions, because that's still about the problem, but really, what is the world we want to create? What is the world we want to live in? And how do we focus more on building that world and a little less on obsessing about the problems? And so I offer that to you as we begin to wind down our conversation. When you think of the future of this nation and the future of philanthropy, if you had a magic wand and could just fast forward to 50 years from now, everybody read your book, they all obeyed your instructions, and they renounced the mindset of control, and they adopted the community engagement. How is the world different? How is philanthropy different? Paint us a picture of where we want to go that makes all of the changes you're suggesting worthwhile.
I love that question. When you look at the last 50 years and how our economic system is performing, the RAND Corporation, I think, or the RAND research entity, I think they're both the same, has come out with a couple of reports over the last few years. The output of our economic system is the following. Since 1975, every year, $2.2 trillion has moved from the working class to the 1%. Accumulated over 50 years, that's $80 trillion has moved from the working class to the 1%. I believe that is at the heart of all of our problems in this country. So I'd like to think 50 years from now, what a great, because we're talking past 50 years, what can we say about 50 years from now? I'd like to think that philanthropy, institutional philanthropy, just to be clear, foundations and our related organizations out there have shifted the narrative and have found a way to contribute to a system that generates $2.2 trillion in transfer from the 1% to the working class. Because currently, the way foundations are set up, we are currently one of the contributors to that transfer of wealth from the working class to the 1%. We are currently, through tax policy, through inflation, and through wage stagnation, foundations are performing like they are because we are engaged in things that are making that, in my opinion, upside down transfer happen. So in my view, if we can get 50 years from now, even if we've gotten back 50 trillion of it the other way, I think that feels pretty good. That would be a great number. But to think that we are in the situation we're in, $40 trillion in public debt, I don't even know how much in private debt, people living without any potential for homes, people living without much of an opportunity to get ahead in this country. You've got to believe. Yes, I mean, I'm not a economic professor. I can't speak to it, but you take $80 trillion out of people's hands and give it to people in the 1%, I think you've got a problem. And I think we need to fix that. And I think foundations could play a role in that, either by just going away or turning their assets to a better system, to a future that maybe you've thought about.
All right, my last question to you today is a call to action. So leave our listeners with one thing that you would call individual donors to do, and one thing that you would call private philanthropy, institutional philanthropy to do. What must they do now for your vision of 50 years from now to come true?
I know this is a pretty flexible term, and I'm not actually setting up a checklist of things for people to do. We've had a lot of people come back after the book, both in talks and just on email saying, okay, I buy it. Now what, Glenn? You didn't give me anything to do in the book. So I'll throw one thing out. I know this is a very elastic concept, but I do, you and I have had a conversation today about a lot of irrationalities, in my opinion, that exist within the foundation system and the DAF system. I would love to encourage more people to simply reflect on this. Reflect on it and ask yourself, how much of this can you change? Can you let go? Can you give up control? Really take it into your body. How does it feel to even think about letting go? And if you are struggling with that, there are lots of places you can go to address it. But the one place I would not encourage you to go is onto the board of a foundation. I think you should step away. And you should come to some grip with that. I think or lean in and change your approach. Address that mindset and become the public steward we want you to be. So that, to me, it's reflection. It's some deep consideration. It's asking why you can't move money to the frontline organizations, why you think it's more important for you to have it in your own hands. That, to me, is what we all need right now from governance and from foundation staff. And I will work on coming up with some good questions and exercises, and we'll get them out there. But I think you can probably, just from this conversation alone, Shane, you've brought up a whole bunch of great topics for people to think about. I think we can come out of this conversation and do some reflecting. And I know, again, it's elastic, it's mushy. It's not like move this to this, do that to that. You can come up with your own path. I don't need to give it to you. Mine was mine, and you can read about it in the book, but mine is not it. And I'm far from perfect, believe me. I don't know if I want anyone to follow my path, but I think we should all take our path.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with me today and for sharing your wisdom with our listeners and our viewers now that we're on video. Truly, thank you for the podcast that you do, the book that you've written, the work that you do at Stupski, and all of the ways you're trying to influence the sector. I appreciate you.
Same, Shane, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Glen Galaich, and thank you for watching or listening. The show has expanded to video this season, so make sure to find us at Liberty Hill Foundation on YouTube to enjoy the gorgeous visuals we've added. Hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode.